Kingsfield would be one of the first initial games to ever be released on the Sony PlayStation when the console first launched way back in 1994, that would be developed and published by From Software, a company that is well known for creating among some of the best and yet most difficult action RPGs in existence, with this series often being considered as the precursor to what is now known as the Souls type genre that mixes action with some extremely difficult and instant death gameplay, that upon dying you will lose all of your items, requiring you or forcing you more to the point to play through the game in its entirety from scratch. So the game plays from a first person dungeon crawling perspective, where players navigate through dungeons and different types of environments that are rendered using real-time 3D graphics and physics, where you can utilise different explorative elements in order to find items, but you can also utilise close quarters combat and magic to defeat enemies. So you'll gain access from likes of weapons to ranged types of elements with crossbows and so forth, and you can also use potions and magic abilities to help you unlock traps, but also to defeat enemies as well. But you'll have a mixture of different enemy types, as there is also some horror based elements within the game, as you're crawling through the dark dungeons you will fight all types of different monsters, anything from overgrown plants to grotesque hideous abominations to skeletons and other sorts of mystical entities that you must either try to defeat or try to run away from. But in most cases some enemies will be so strong or you won't be leveled enough to have any chance of defeating them, so you'll need to go and find the resources that you need, from armor to shields, to allow you to level up your character in order so that you can have any sort of chance of winning altercations. Upon the game's original launch, again with it being one of the first original titles to be released when the console was released in December of 1994, due to the difficulty of the game and its unconventional structure, the main reaction from players was mixed at best, often seen from a negative standpoint because the game was so difficult. But gradually through word of mouth and magazine advertisements, sales of the game started to increase, which resulted in the game becoming an overall commercial success. From Software would also be responsible for creating many other interesting games on the console, from the likes of Shadow Tower, even with the Echo Knight series, another popular first person horror style franchise that also saw a release on the PlayStation. In many ways this game was revolutionary for its time because there really was nothing else like it out there. But when we go back to play it nowadays, the controls can be sluggish and cumbersome, to say the least, where it does take a while to move around the environments. The clunkiness of the controls also inhibits you from moving quickly, especially with altercations amongst enemies. So you'll need to use strategies in order to time your attacks. Get too close and you're pretty much a goner. But if you're too far away, you won't be able to reach them or do enough damage in order to make it worthwhile. So you really need to think about every move that you make when you're playing it. Now, even though this is one of the first games released in Japan, the series would see multiple sequels released also in other regions, with Kingsfield 2 and Kingsfield 3 again being very popular. But when Kingsfield 2 was released, especially in America and other regions, the game was then called Kingsfield, which confused a lot of people because the original Kingsfield didn't really get a release outside of the region. It only got a release in Japan. It would have been its sequels that got a release outside of Japan. But the problem is that the sequel was called Kingsfield, so they completely messed it up. But that was a weird thing with video games back then, is that the names that they gave games, especially even with sequels, they would just call it just the name of the original game, which didn't make sense. It was very, very weird with the branding, but I suppose they never thought that years later that most of us would be going back to playing these games or getting access to them, so I think they really didn't think that far ahead. But some of the games' names were just totally unusual. They just didn't make any sense, in all fairness. Now, in saying that, I've spent time playing this game, and yeah, it is clunky, it is slow, it is sluggish, but I can see what people mean by it. I can see what the intention was behind the game back then. Once you put a bit of time into it, it is a decent experience, but only if you can have the patience to sit down and master the fiddly controls, and to understand that once you die, you start from the beginning, regardless of how far that you've got, because this game is vast and expansive. It is a long game. It will take you quite a while to get through all of the areas and level up your character in order to find the right resources to use in the right areas against the right enemies and so forth. It is very tricky. A lot of trial and error is involved with this game, but it's easy to see why it went on to spawn multitude of different series and even sequels in its own right. That From Software is considered like the go-to standard for these type of games now in modern systems across the games industry. No other company can do it better. They pretty much have set the standard, and it all started with Kingsfield on the PlayStation. It's a very interesting title, very quirky, very reflective of its time. They managed to inspire a whole generation or future generations of similar games, but at the same time they won't be for everybody. If you're a casual gamer, you will struggle with this, but if you're a more seasoned and experienced and yet patient player, this would be the game for you, make no mistake. But regardless of what I think of Kingsfield, what are your thoughts of the game and what did you think of it overall? Did you manage to play this back when it was released all those years ago, or have you managed to play it in recent times with emulation or even getting copies online? So I would love to hear your thoughts of this game, so be sure to share it down in the comments below. And if you would like to see more content around other types of games similar to this that were also released on the PlayStation, then leave a like on the video, and you can also check out this playlist here on screen to see a lot more of those games in action. And as always, keep those gaming memories alive.